Number 5. Great Aunt Eater. Our first story today is going to be this one shared to us from Reddit, in which this user posted a thread claiming that they had been abducted by aliens and that you should ask them anything. Let's take a listen to their story and see what we think, if it holds water or if it's just a tall tale. It happened about 3 years ago in a rural part of Virginia. I don't really remember it like a real memory, but more like a dream. That being said, no, I was not asleep. I was driving home from a friend's house when it happened. I can remember vaguely what they looked like and a few other things. When my memory kicks back in, I'm sitting outside the car on the side of the road. I have never told police and I never plan on it. The aliens I remember as looking rather reptilian. They weren't your cliche big heads, gray skin, but they were bipedal. Their craft I don't rightly remember, apart from the inside being very smooth and very bright above me. It is scary to think about, but I do remember a few things they did to me. I wore a mask of some sort and they pulled hairs. There was a minute buzzing I recall and a thing over the top of my head. There were several of them. When I woke up, I was fully clothed, beside my car, on the same road I was traveling on when I last remembered. I had no scars or puncture marks or any markings, so I don't think they injected me or anything. I wasn't gone for any large amount of time, only a few hours from what I guess, and I haven't told anyone but my brother who knows me. He was just baffled and then curious. Going through the thread, the Redditor does add some minor insight on some questions, even providing a crude diagram of one of the aliens. Unfortunately, not much more detail than that is known, but isn't that the case with all stories of unknown flying objects? They're unknown for a reason. And if you're looking for way more stories of unknown flying objects, well, Top 5 Scary has all of that and then some to spare. We've been doing videos on aliens for a long time, my friends. So hit subscribe so you don't miss any of that. Please make sure you ring that little bell as well, and that way you'll get every one of our videos notified to you as soon as they go up. But do that at the end of this video, because I got 4 more abduction stories for you coming right now. Number 4, Ethiopia's abduction. Alright, this next one is wild. Also from Reddit, take a little listen. In the 1960s in Ethiopia, my dad was a child at the time playing with his best friend Gabriel after school. They were playing in the fenced backyard of my dad's house. My dad turned his back for a second, then turned to look back at his friend, and Gabriel was gone. Now, it's important to note that my dad and Gabriel were both from the top 1% of Ethiopia's ruling class. My dad's father was Minister of Interior of Ethiopia, and Gabriel's father was a 4-star general of Ethiopia. The backyard Gabriel had disappeared from had 10-foot bricked walls with armed soldiers patrolling on the outside. A couple of hours pass. His parents, my dad's parents, and guards are searching, but nobody finds him. 48 hours pass. Now there's a nationwide search for this important kid. It's on the news. Police are searching door to door, describing him and what he was wearing when he disappeared. He was wearing a private school uniform. Helicopters even search the countryside looking for him, but still nothing. A month passes, then 2, then 4. People start losing hope that he would ever be found and think the worst. Exactly 6 months to the day he disappeared, Gabriel appears back in my dad's backyard. He looked exactly the same as when he disappeared. And this is where things start to get weird. Once they confirmed he was okay, they start asking him where he'd been. He said a couple of nice men took him on a trip. He was in a white room that glowed, and other children were there from different countries. The white glowing room had no windows, and the doors disappeared into walls. There were buttons on the walls, and if someone pushed them, a bed would come out. He was then all of a sudden in a city that was glowing and clean, but with flying cars. He said there were people there, but they looked strange like us, but different. One was a nice man who was still with him and took him to a tall building where they had to stay for a while. The man showed him a room for entertainment. Gabriel said he could push a button and the room itself would go places, including an open field, the beach, then the room itself would travel. He said after a couple hours, he was taken back to Ethiopia and appeared in the backyard. He thought he was only gone for a couple hours total. Obviously, no one believed him, and with Ethiopia being a very religious country, most adults around him thought that he had got possessed. Gabriel was even forced to see a priest to get the spirits out of him. My dad kept in contact with him. He got a doctorate in physics and I believe works in Holland these days. That's where the post concludes, but if that story is true, that sounds like one of the most wild abduction stories I've ever heard. Keeping someone for 6 months, but he thought it was just a few hours.
In our third spot, we have Patrick Carnes. On April 13th, 2011, 86-year-old Patrick, or Pat Carnes, and his dog Lucky disappeared off of a stretch of I-80 in Nevada. This stretch is often called the Big Lonely. During that drive, he got pulled over by a state trooper for doing an illegal lane change. During the conversation, he told the state trooper that he was following a trucker to the next town where he was going to get a room for the night. That was the last time anyone had ever seen or heard from Pat and Lucky. The next morning, his vehicle was found abandoned at the side of the road. In the car was Pat's luggage, wallet, and checkbook, but no signs of Pat or Lucky. That's when the investigation began. Police conducted over 600 hours of canine searches, they had ATVs doing off-road searches, and even had planes flying over the area. Nothing came of any of this. Police are convinced that Pat was the victim of a serial killer. Maybe the person driving the truck that he was following was the serial killer that gained Pat's trust. I mean, 5 years earlier, an abandoned car was found in the exact same spot as Pat's. Its driver, Judith Casita, disappeared also and has never been found. And apparently, hitchhikers also frequently go missing along that road. So it might just be that there's a serial killer loose in that area. Coming in at number 2, we have Cynthia Anderson. On August 4th, 1981, Cynthia Anderson left for work at a law firm in Toledo, Ohio. When her employers arrived, they found Cynthia's car in the parking lot, but Cynthia was not at work. What's freaky is that the book she was reading was left open to a page about a violent kidnapping. What's even scarier is that a year prior, Cindy apparently had reoccurring scary dreams about being abducted and murdered by a stranger. During the investigation, police discovered that the only items missing were Cindy's car keys and purse. There were no evidence of forced entry or struggles in the office. They also found that no calls were answered after 10 a.m., so it's believed that she was abducted around that time. Now, people believe that one of the attorneys that works at her law firm had something to do with her disappearance. A month later, he went to prison for dealing drugs. Authorities think that Cynthia knew about this and was kidnapped and then killed to prevent her from leaking the information. But we don't truly know. And in our number 1 spot, we have Rebecca Coriam. Rebecca Coriam was a 24-year-old worker on the Disney Wonder cruise ship. She disappeared on or from the ship on March 22, 2011. At 5:45 that morning, she was seen on CCTV footage talking on the phone, wearing men's clothing, and she was visibly distressed. After she hung up the phone, she was never seen again. At 9 a.m., Rebecca didn't show up for her shift. That's when the Disney staff were told to search the ship for her. This came of nothing. Then the US Coast Guards and Mexican Navy were contacted to search the ocean, thinking that she may have fallen overboard. Again, nothing. Here's where it gets interesting. Many people think that Disney knows exactly what happened to Rebecca and have attempted to cover the whole thing up. Let me share with you the facts. For starters, the captain told Rebecca's parents that he believes she was swept off of Deck 5 by a big wave. However, there were no indications of stormy weather that night, let alone a rogue wave. Then the crew showed her parents the CCTV footage of her daughter on that phone call. They claim that this was from Deck 5, saying that after the phone call, she went out on the deck where she was wiped out by the wave. But the footage was cropped to hide the timestamp and location. In fact, it was from Deck 1, not Deck 5. On top of that, the Disney crew gave the parents a sandal that they claim was Rebecca's, which they found on the deck. But the sandal was the wrong size and style of Rebecca. Even a crew member stated, and I quote, "Disney knows exactly what happened. That phone call she had, it was taped. Everything here is taped. There's CCTV footage everywhere. Disney has the tape." So he believes that Disney has the footage that shows exactly what happened to Rebecca, but they aren't releasing it with fear that it will tarnish their happy family-friendly reputation.
Number 5 on this list is D.B. Cooper. This is one of the craziest cases ever, and honestly, when I was reading it, I had to confirm that it was actually real life. So back in 1971, on November 24th, a plane hijacking occurred. D.B. Cooper, who called himself Dan Cooper, boarded a plane from Portland to Seattle. While he was on the plane, he revealed to the stewardesses that he had a with him, and he demanded that he get 4 parachutes and $200,000. Whether this was a real or just a fake is unknown because it never actually went off, but it was at least convincing enough to the people on board that they gave him what he wanted. The flight landed and he let off the passengers but held on to the crew. Now that he had his money and his parachutes, he wanted a flight to Mexico or else he'd blow everybody sky high. This was agreed to and the plane took off for Mexico. It was dark at this point, but that was all part of Cooper's plan. While the plane was mid-air, Cooper took one of his parachutes and his money and he jumped straight out of the plane into the night. So that was back in 1971, and since then no one has ever seen or heard from him since. This disappearance is one of the most famous in history and something that's baffled the FBI since it happened. In 2016 they closed the case but never really did find anything concrete about Cooper. Tons of theories have popped up over the years though about who he really was and where he went. The most popular and likely the most probable was that Cooper just died after he jumped out of the airplane. Either he didn't stick the landing or he died in the wilderness that he would have landed in. Alternatively though, people think that Cooper was actually a man named Robert Rackstraw who was a military helicopter pilot. There was a mild break in the case where in 2011 the niece of Lynn Doyle Cooper came forward and said that it was her uncle that did it as he planned the whole thing at a family gathering. But that could never be confirmed and the case has since gone dead. Number 4 on this list is the Phantom Barber. This was one of the strangest cases in history and remains unsolved to this day. In 1942, in a small town in Mississippi, there was a crime spree that happened which centered around a barber. A man who would break into homes and while people were sleeping cut their hair off. They would wake up to these ridiculous haircuts feeling very violated. These hair crimes persisted for a while until they escalated to violence. The home of Terrell Heidenberg and his wife was broken into and they were attacked by a man with an iron pipe. This same man was believed to be the Phantom Barber. This incident really ramped up the search for the man and somebody was eventually brought into custody. 57-year-old William Dolan was arrested and charged with the crimes. In his home, it was found that he had several samples of human hair. It also didn't help his case that he was a chemist, and it was believed that the victims of the Phantom Barber were incapacitated with chloroform before having their hair cut off. This seemed like all the evidence needed until William Dolan actually passed a lie detector test in regards to the crime. Then accusations of the police work came out saying that they rushed the process and mishandled evidence. This led to William's eventual release, which means that the Phantom Barber just totally disappeared. If William truly is innocent, then nobody has any idea who this criminal was and why they were doing what they were doing in the first place. William has been the only credible suspect, and the case has since gone dead after extensive investigation.
Number 3. Frederick Valentich. Our next mysterious case is Frederick Valentich, an Australian pilot, a well-trained aerial ace. He had 150 hours of manned flight experience and was permitted to fly alone, provided it was in good weather conditions. He also had a love of extraterrestrial life, a deep desire to find that unknown above. Well, Valentich might have got his wish. Tragically, it might have cost him his life. The year was 1978. Frederick Valentich was performing a 125 nautical mile training flight flying to a small landmass called Kings Island. While at 4,500 feet in the air, Valentich thought he had seen something with him. The Melbourne Flight Service insisted that there wasn't anything in the air with him, but Frederick radioed back and said that there was something on his tail. He claimed that he saw something glowing with 4 repeating bright lights and was rushing past him, and he described it as shiny, metallic, and chrome and looking like a small manned craft. Now, unsure what was happening, Valentich on radio to ground control told them that he was experiencing engine troubles inexplicably. Could this strange flying object be the source of these unexpected problems? Valentich complained out about whatever was following him to the Melbourne Flight Service, saying, "It's hovering and it's not an aircraft." Those would be the last words anyone ever heard from Frederick. Minutes after that last transmission, he went silent and the plane, or the mysterious craft, was never found. An intense search revealed nothing. No sign of the man. The only lead was a local farmer alleging that the day Frederick disappeared, he saw what looked like a civilian aircraft seemingly fused with what looked like a saucer. The farmer told authorities he was worried about being dismissed as a crackpot, so he didn't tell anyone what he saw that day. What do you think? Should he have checked his eyes better? Or was he perhaps the last person to see the remnant of Frederick Valentich before he was carried off into who knows what? Number 2. Michael Rockefeller. When Michael Rockefeller was born, he was born with a silver spoon to a lineage of millionaires in the late 1930s. His great-grandfather, one John Rockefeller, is one of the richest men to have ever lived. The Rockefellers had hoped that Michael would follow them in the family business. Michael, however, had other ideas and wanted to use his millions of dollars to goof off and take it easy, which is what most of us would, I think. Michael had wanderlust in his heart and a deep interest in anthropology, specifically focused on Nigerian, Mayan, and Aztec cultures. Michael's father sat on a board of a museum in New York where Michael would discover this passion, hoping to one day open a collection of indigenous art in New York. After some discussions with the Dutch Museum of Ethnology, terrible name, Michael had decided he would set out to the massive island off the coast of Australia, at the time known as Dutch New Guinea. In 1961, he set off to collect the art of the Asmat people who lived there. It would be a one-way trip. The Asmat people that he was going to study were very disconnected from the rest of the world. They had previously seen Dutch colonizers, but otherwise they weren't getting a ton of visitors. The Asmat believed that the land beyond their island was inhabited by spirits, and they saw the Euros and the Americans as supernatural beings that had come over from across the sea. Michael and his team were allowed to study the people, but were banned from purchasing or taking anything, which held a great deal of significance to the Asmat. Nonetheless, Michael was thrilled with everything he'd been finding and could not wait to open his exhibit. In November 1961, Michael was on a boat accompanied by other anthropologists when a sudden squall threw the boat off its course. 12 miles away from the shore, but Michael insisted he could swim for it, and he was never seen again. The Rockefellers would spend the next few months spending a small fortune trying to find Michael, but gave up after never uncovering anything. The case went cold for years, but officers believed that Michael hadn't been lost to the water, but was rather offered as part of a sacrifice. His head chopped off, his flesh eaten, his bones made into weaponry, fun stuff. An investigator, one Carl Hoffman, uncovered this while filming the Asmat people. He saw a group of men acting out a scene, miming the act of, removing someone's head from the rest of their neck and attacking them with spears. Now, we can't really find this footage, but through interpretation and translation was a stern warning to the other villagers that Hoffman reported. Pop your ears open and take a listen. Don't you tell this story to any other man. I hope you remember it, and you must keep this for us. I hope this is for you and you only. Don't talk to anyone, to other people, or another village. If people question you, don't answer. Don't talk to them because the story is only for you. If you tell it to them, you'll die. Or any other village because the story is only for us. I probably shouldn't have shared it just then. Now, maybe just scrub that. Number 1, Lars Mittank. Lars Mittank is a young German man who became infamous in 2014 when his disappearance captured the attention of the world. Last seen on airport security footage, he's been called the most famous missing person on YouTube. Wow, isn't that a lovely title? I'd put that right on my resume. In July 2014, Mittank was vacationing in Varna, Bulgaria, I've heard lovely things, with a group of friends. Apparently things were pretty unremarkable until an argument about football at a bar turned into a brawl. You see, Mittank was a Bremen man and he was getting into an argument with some nasty Bayern fans. I actually don't know nothing about German football. Clear that up in the comments. Mittank would suffer a ruptured eardrum and was told to stay on the ground, for flying could damage his ears even further. So Lars decided to stay in Varna just a little bit longer while the rest of the party would return back to Berlin. Now here's where things take a turn for the strange. CCTV footage from the airport shows Lars behaving strangely, for lack of a better word. Dropping his luggage, running in a sprint, hopping a fence, the kind of things you would do if you were running away from somebody. His final texts warned his mother to cancel his credit cards as he believed he was being pursued. This footage was the last time he was ever seen, as he vanished without a trace shortly thereafter. Both German and Bulgarian authorities launched investigations, but nobody found anything. Hospital records turned up nothing, and outside of a few disconnected sightings of alleged hitchhikers which could have matched descriptions, nothing was ever outright confirmed. So what happened? What happened? There are theories. Some speculate perhaps that the medication he was prescribed was causing a psychological breakdown, combined with the paranoia of being attacked and reeling from the attack earlier in the week. The doctor who prescribed that medication, though, noted he never even filed the prescription, and the doctor was perplexed and concerned with the seemingly causeless change of behavior. Number 5. D.B. Cooper. One of the most infamous disappearance cases in history, and I'm gonna be honest, probably my personal favorite unsolved mystery of all time. If you haven't heard the story of the real-life daredevil heister, Mr. D.B. Cooper, you're in for a treat and then some. Depending on your definition of success, you could argue D.B. Cooper might be the most successful criminal in history, since not only did he get off with quite an impressive take, but he got away with all his crimes and avoided capture, if he's still alive, that is. On November 24th, 1971, a man using an alias of Dan Cooper walked up to the ticket counter at Portland International and booked a one-way ticket to Seattle, claiming that he was on business. He was technically correct in that assessment. Once on board the plane, Cooper passed a note to a flight attendant, and he was not asking for an extra bag of peanuts and fluffing his pillow. No, he was just letting the attendant know that he had brought a bomb on board the flight and demanded $200,000 and 4 parachutes. And if he caught a whiff of any funny business, he'd turn this plane into a national tragedy on the 6 o'clock news, see? So, you know, nothing unreasonable really. I make all those demands whenever I'm hangry, pretty normal stuff. So the plane landed in Seattle, as originally planned, and authorities were summoned to deliver the ransom money and parachutes to Cooper. The passengers were relieved and eventually let go, but the flight crew was stuck with their new boss, Mr. Cooper, who'd taken them hostage. Cooper seized the plane, planning a flight path to Mexico City, but midway through the flight, Cooper, who was a huge fan of the film Point Break and wanted to pay homage to it, jumped out of a plane with all of the money. D.B. Cooper jumping out of that plane with a suitcase full of money would be the last time anyone ever saw him. He jumped out of that plane and into the stuff of history book legends, the Hall of Fame of heisters. Move over, Payday crew, this guy's got you beat. Despite extensive searching, not a hair of D.B. Cooper ever turned up. Some speculate rather bluntly that perhaps he miscalculated the angle and splattered somewhere across the Northwest and the heist wasn't as impressive as we thought, while others imagined that he got off easy, he's knocking back Mai Tais on a Hawaiian island, enjoying the spoils of his loot. But who was the guy to begin with? A career crook on one last job? Someone trying it out? Someone snapping? Several theories suggest he was ex-military, special forces, which would explain his proficiency. In fact, the leading hypothesis is that he was ex-military. We may never know who the real D.B. Cooper is, and that's fine. That's the way he'd want it. And if we don't know who he is, it makes it that much more fun for us. He could be any one of us. He could be you, he could be me, he could be... I'll stop talking there. And if you're looking for more scary videos and strange stories out there, we've got all of that and then some. If you can think it up, we've probably done a video or two on it. We've got quite the catalog. So click on through, hit subscribe, and please tickle that little bell and make sure you don't miss a single scream. But would you kindly do that at the end of this video? Because I got 4 more missing persons cases ready for you now. Number 4, the Mary Celeste. Our next mysterious case is a bit of an outlier, a little bit of a cheat. I know. It's not just one person going missing, it's an entire ship. How does that happen? December 1872, the captain of the Mary Celeste, one Benjamin Briggs, cast off to New York to travel to Italy for unknown reasons, but probably for the tomatoes. The ship was kept to a rather tight crew. A staff of 8, plus Briggs's wife and daughter, were enough to man the vessel. The voyage seemed like it went pretty well until another vessel, the Delgratia, came into contact with the Celeste and were chilled at what they'd found when they recovered the ship drifting aimlessly. As rescuers boarded the ship, they were greeted with a maritime mystery to forever haunt them. The ship seemed to be in perfect working order, no signs of damage or distress. Had it not been found freely floating, they'd assumed the ship was just built. Aside from a single lifeboat missing, the ship was in good condition, the holds stocked with food and water. The crew's personal belongings were scattered about. The table was set for a meal, as if the crew had been minutes away from breaking bread. So what happened? What reasonable captain would abandon a perfectly serviceable, well-stocked ship? While reasonable explanations were offered, theories of piracy or mutiny prevailing. Now, the ship being relatively untouched does call into question the notion of piracy, as I don't know how much you know about pirates, but they didn't tend to leave the rum behind if there is any. Any pirate captain worth his salt would have plundered that thing down to the floorboards. And there didn't appear to be any struggle at all, so no forceful evacuation situation, nobody kicked them off the ship. So with rationale out of the way, we've nowhere left to turn but blind and wild speculation. Theories of supernatural beings, cursed gold, vengeful spirits, sea monsters, Davy Jones. Take your pick of whatever nautical bedtime story you think could have overtaken the Mary Celeste. And you know what? Let me know down below. I love pirate ghost stories more than anything. Perhaps it was a bit of sea madness, cabin fever. Maybe it's whatever happened to those two guys in the lighthouse happened to them here. No matter how you slice it, the vanishing of the Mary Celeste is a head scratcher of a mystery. More lost souls to the darkness that lurks below the ocean's water. Wary yourselves against the whispers that echo the seas, for the spirits of the Mary Celeste may still be watching, eager to claim another.
Coming in at number 3, we've got Amelia Earhart. The classic mysterious disappearance. I feel like even kids know this one, whether it's from their abridged history books or pop culture putting their own spin on the story. But one thing doesn't change. Nobody truly knows what happened to this flying ace during her most elaborate trip. Amelia Earhart was determined to break all sorts of records. She wanted to be the first to do lots of stuff, too. This goal was realized when she became the first female pilot to fly solo across the Atlantic Ocean. However, this achievement was not enough for her. She and her navigator, Fred Noonan, decided they would try their hand at flying around the world. The entire world, all the way around. That is a tall order no matter how you look at it. But they were determined. They were ready. However, the world had other plans for them. They set off from New Guinea, hoping to make it to a remote island in the Pacific. Together they managed to cover about 22,000 miles, which made up about 2/3 of their planned expedition. However, at that point they ran low on fuel, and after that they seemed to just outright disappear. Somewhere over the Pacific, the fearless aviator and her navigator vanished. For 2 weeks, rescue crews searched for the downed aircraft, but to no avail. To this day, no solid evidence of Amelia has cropped up. Many theories have been floated as to how this could have happened though. Some say she crashed on her way to Holloway Island, with the plane sinking to the bottom of the ocean. Others claim she was captured on the Japan-controlled Saipan Island after making an emergency landing there. This fuels all sorts of other theories too, with some saying that she was executed and others believing that she was released into the United States under an alias. Nothing has been confirmed, however, and thus the Amelia Earhart mystery remains one of the most mysterious out there. Hey, if you're liking the video so far, make sure to give it a big thumbs up. It really helps us out with the algorithm. On with the video. Coming in at number 2, we've got Lauren Spearer. Now, for round 2 of mysterious after-party disappearances, let this be a lesson to you all. If you party too hard, you might forget where you are. Forget where you are and you might disappear. In 2011, Indiana University student Lauren Spearer vanished, seemingly into thin air. She was last seen in downtown Bloomington, near a friend's off-campus apartment. The disappearance quickly turned into an incident of national importance, with a widespread Find Lauren campaign being launched. Media outlets across the country reported on the disappearance, inspiring celebrities to join in and spread the word. Social media latched onto the campaign as well, which spread the message far and wide. But all this awareness led to nothing, as Lauren still remains missing to this day. Some folks think her friends might have supplied her with drugs and she overdosed. In the ensuing chaos, the friends might have decided to hide the body as best they could to avoid being involved. Her family hired a private investigator in 2011 to assist in the effort. The investigator, Michael Ciravolo, has remained on the case for the better part of a decade. Every tip he gets seems to lead to a dead end though, which is frustrating. At this point, he's fully committed to finding the lost student, and in fact, he feels a deep connection with the family. The case is close to his heart now, and he doesn't plan on giving up. So with such widespread attention and the dedication of a private investigator, how is it that Lauren still remains a mystery? One would think in the era in which smartphones are becoming so much more prevalent, more evidence would crop up, but at this point, no big leads are out there. And coming in at number 1, we've got D.B. Cooper. Now here's a fascinating disappearance. On November 24th, 1971, an unknown man hijacked a plane. After ordering a drink, he claimed to have a bomb in his suitcase and demanded $200,000 in 20s. He got what he asked for when they landed, and once the rest of the passengers disembarked, he told them to fly to Mexico City. Cooper didn't make it to his stated destination though. After collecting the incredible sum of ransom money, he donned a parachute and leapt from the aircraft. Hardcore, right? It's unknown what happened to him, however. The FBI seems to believe he wouldn't have made it considering the conditions of his jump. But no evidence of a parachute-wearing man with $200,000 in cash has ever shown up either. He might have been swept up in the wind and rain, landing in a heavily wooded area wearing business attire, or maybe he did end up making it to safety. It's impossible to know for sure, but it sure is fun to hypothesize.
Starting us off at number 5, we've got Robert Bobby Dunbar.
Over 100 years ago, police investigators were a little less sophisticated. DNA tests didn't exist, and a lot of crimes were solved without a whole lot of proof. What's interesting about the Bobby Dunbar case is that modern forensic techniques were used almost a century after the fact to unveil some new and shocking information. Back in 1912, little Bobby wandered off from his family and was never seen again. There are many theories as to what fate might have befallen the little lad. Some believe he fell from a railroad trestle into some water and drowned. Others seem to think that he was abducted by a strange man sighted in the area around that time. It's likely that we'll never know for sure. Now, back in the day, something very odd happened. Authorities found a little boy accompanying an older gentleman, and they thought they had found Bobby Dunbar. They arrested a handyman in Mississippi who was with a child matching Bobby's description. The man stated that the boy was a travel companion given to him by his servant Julia. This story didn't convince the police, and he was brought in on kidnapping. Even after he was arrested, the man maintained his innocence, which actually makes a lot of sense. See, this kid had no problem stepping into Bobby's life. He took his name and his family and lived a relatively normal childhood from there on out. Even as an adult, he claimed that he was indeed Bobby Dunbar and even recounted memories from the kidnapping. However, this was disproven many years later. One of the new Bobby's grandchildren decided to look into the situation and got some DNA testing done in the early 2000s. It was announced that the tests proved that the child found with the handyman so many years ago was not Bobby Dunbar. So nobody really knows what happened to the original Bobby, nor does anyone know the true identity of the boy who took its place. Holy smokes. Coming in at number 4, we got Skylar Neese. A little more modern and very tragic, the tale of Skylar Neese is every parent's nightmare. Skylar was an upstanding student, worked a part-time job, and had aspirations to become a lawyer. Her disappearance didn't line up with any of this. Skylar disappeared from her home in West Virginia in July of 2012. The surveillance system at the apartment complex her family lived in captured her sneaking out through her bedroom window. She then hopped into a car with 2 of her friends. Nobody saw Skylar again until 6 months later in January. Her remains were found by the side of the road. During the time in between, authorities assumed that she had run away and as such didn't activate an Amber Alert. Her family was desperate to get her home, convinced that she would never run away, and was searching on their own. They even enlisted the very same friends she drove off with to hand out missing person flyers. The thing is, before her death, Skylar had recently gotten into an argument with these 2 very same friends and was reluctant to go with them. Eventually, they did convince her to come along and smoke with them like they usually would. Once they made it to their regular spot just across the state border, Skylar's friends claimed they forgot their lighter. Skylar offered to go get hers from the car, and as soon as she turned around, they pounced on her. Using kitchen knives they had hidden on them, the 2 friends stabbed Skylar over 50 times until she died. They'd attempted to bury her body using a shovel they brought, but found the ground too rocky and opted to cover her body with sticks and stones instead. After cleaning up and ditching their bloody clothes, the 2 friends headed home. Their motive for the crime? They didn't want to be friends with Skylar anymore. I think there are definitely better ways of going about that. They did eventually get caught though, and now both of them are in prison.
Number 3. At an alien. I think this might be a fantasy for some of us. I know if you grew up with Halo, maybe this, seemed like a lifestyle. But take a listen to this next wild point when someone thinks they might have at an alien. Listen. A few months ago, I started having really weird dreams in which I was in a place I did not know, and I remember being really afraid. I kept it to myself for the longest time until I started noticing that I had bruising that I couldn't explain. They started on my arms and legs and then moved to my back. Most of them looked like perfect circles, like someone had poked me hard enough with an unsharpened pencil. The dreams kept coming and I started having really bad headaches. After a few weeks after the first dream, I started noticing bruising on my wife. Then one day I was in my bedroom and I noticed my pistol was out of place. I had one of those dreams the night before. So I took out the mag and I noticed there was a round missing. Now a little background here. I used to be a cop and I'm an NRA firearms instructor, so I am very familiar with firearms and I take great ensure that they are safe and ready. I asked my wife if she had touched the Glock and she said no. I took it apart and found what looked like powdered residue in the barrel. Now I started to freak out because someone had a pistol. After I found that it had been messed with, the dreams and the bruising stopped completely. I believe that my wife and I were being abducted. I further believe that it stopped after I tried to fight back and possibly at an alien in our house. I know it sounds odd, and I know I wouldn't believe it if someone else told me this story. It's part of the reason why I never tell anyone but a handful of close friends. Imagine, so you do it. You know, you see an alien, you get abducted by one, you have this first contact moment. Not only that, but you shoot at an alien like you're Han Solo. You get to do the coolest thing any human being will ever do, and you're not even 100% sure if that happened. That is such a cruel twist of fate. Number 2, something impossible. Another one, guess from where? If you guessed Reddit, you're correct. Take a listen. I'm not sure what to think about this, but my friend who was in the car thinks it was an alien's. My friend and I were driving north from Kenosha, Wisconsin to his house about a half hour away. We had missed the on-ramp before, so we double checked that we're going the right way with my GPS. Now after a while, I notice a car has been tailgating me. I quickly matched the headlight pattern with that of an officer of the law, but my cruise control is set at the speed limit. After being nervous about this copper for about 5 minutes of following, he very suddenly changes lanes to our left and blasts past us to tailgate someone else a few lengths ahead. Now the cop freaked us out, but we were almost to our off-ramp, so we were looking for the sign, and then I see it. Welcome to Illinois. We didn't make any turns, we stayed on the freeway, and the section we were driving on didn't have any splits. There was absolutely no turning around, we were going north. But the freakiest part was I pulled over and started doing some Google Maps calculations. From the place we left, it took a half-hour driving south to get to the Illinois border. And we had started off going farther away, but it had only been 20 minutes. The landmarks we had passed going north were also more than 20 minutes away. In the time that had passed, we shouldn't have been able to see the landmarks or to drive to Illinois, even if we would have started off going south. My friend who was with me thinks it was an alien encounter. They picked us up and wanted different humans for some reason, but when they put us back, they put us on the correct freeway, only in the wrong location, facing the wrong direction. After we calmed down from our brains melting, the exact same thing happened with that same cop. We had turned around and headed back north, gotten tailed for a few minutes, and then they suddenly changed lanes to the left and blasted the accelerator to get up on somebody's bumper. Aliens? Improbable travel through time and space? Reality checkpoints? I don't have any other way to explain it. Something impossible happened to us. Oh yeah, that kind of stuff happens all the time. That's just the code in the Matrix glitching out a little bit. They should have a patch ready for that next month. You won't even notice the difference. And finally, number 1. My mom tells a story of her and her friend. Let's call her Lisa. When my mom and Lisa were teenagers, they were up on the roof of Lisa's house and they see a bright light in the sky. Next thing they know, the light is gone. Thing is, they think they've been on the roof for 15 minutes, but something like 3 hours passed. Now my mom doesn't exactly remember about what happened during that time, and Lisa simply refuses to talk about it. She would answer my mom with things like, oh I don't know, and drop it. Now you ever hear mom say drop it? Drop it. A couple months later, my mom moves away and loses contact with Lisa for a decade. They finally meet up, and immediately my mom notices that something odd is present about Lisa. She appears very distant, with a dreamy demeanor. After they talk for a bit, Lisa brings up the incident on the roof. My mom says she still doesn't really remember anything about it, but Lisa remembers. She remembers everything. She said that at first it was all in bits and pieces, and she couldn't remember any of it clearly. She was confused, scared, and wanted to avoid discussing it. Then, as time passed, she began to remember more of it. She remembers it all clearly, and she remembers the other 3 times she was abducted after that clearly as well. At first they paralyzed her somehow, and did all sorts of creepy experiments, but by the most recent time, no more probing, they were just talking to her. They didn't speak English or any other language, but she could understand everything they said. Apparently they told her all this stuff about space, Earth, and shockingly predicted things years beforehand, that she would get pregnant in a specific year, and it would be a stillborn, and that she would never have children again. They also told her that it was not their fault, and that they even made an attempt to save her from this, but they were unsuccessful. They said that they had abducted my mother another time after that first incident. Now my mom says she has no recollection of any other abductions, but she does have nightmares about being abducted, but she's almost sure that they're just that, nightmares. Anyway, Lisa tells my mom that every time she speaks with them, she comes to understand the divine truth more and more. When mom asks what that truth is, Lisa just says, "You'll know eventually." And she says that once she learned of the truth, everything became wonderful. Now my mom's seen her a few more times over the years, and she apparently is pretty normal. She doesn't obsess over alien stuff. She only ever brings it up in passing, so it's not a central part of her daily life. But you know, she did mention seeing the divine truth after being abducted several times, so I would say it's somewhat a part of her life.
Coming in at number 5, we've got the Springfield 3, and no, we are not talking about Mo, Lenny, and Carl, although I'm sure they've disappeared mysteriously from time to time. We're talking about the real-life Springfield and 3 people that seemingly had nowhere to disappear to. Back in June of 1992, students in Springfield, Missouri were celebrating their high school graduation. Kickapoo High School had just watched its graduating class toss their hats and jump for joy. The world was opening up for these teenagers. However, for 2 students and even more remarkably one of their mothers, this was actually the end of the line. Or was it? Plenty of parties were being thrown to commemorate the end of the high school experience. Susie Streeter and Stacy McCall were hopping between parties, soaking in the celebratory atmosphere, listening to whatever jock rock was popular in the 90s, living life. But when the night seemed to be drawing to a close, the duo decided it was best to head home. They had originally planned on staying at one house, but deemed it too packed to comfortably crash in, so they went back to Susie's house. At the time, Susie lived there with her mother, Cheryl Levitt. So the 2 girls went home, and that was the last their friends ever saw of them. Assuming all went well, some pals swung by Susie's house the next day to pick up the girls for a trip to the water park. But there was to be no sliding and splashing that day, no. The friends arrived at the house, but nobody seemed to be home. Strangers still, the front door was unlocked and a porch light was broken. The house was largely untouched too, with stuff like cars, keys, cigarettes, and purses all still present. So the 2 graduates made it home and unpacked for sure, and the mother was likely still in the house that previous night. Even the dog was still at home, wandering around. But to this day, nobody is sure what happened to the women. Apparently there was a mysterious message left on the answering machine, but this was deleted somehow before anyone could record it. Anonymous, obscene phone calls were apparently quite common at the time, but could this have been one with more meaning? We might never know. Coming in at number 4, the Sarah Joe. Let this be a lesson to all ye landlubbers. Be careful while out on the water. You never know what might happen. Back in the late 70s, a group of pals decided to have a fun time out on the coast of Maui. Fishing, chatting, and general merriment was on the docket. Disappearing into a storm and washing up years later, not part of the plan. But then again, when do things go exactly as planned? 5 friends boarded the small fishing boat, the Sarah Joe, and made their way out onto the water. What they didn't see coming was an enormous tropical storm. Should have checked the weather, eh? They never returned, sparking a massive search and rescue effort. However, the rescuers came up empty-handed. Unfortunate, but not uncommon when it comes to small boats entering big storms. However, that was just the beginning of the mystery. 10 years passed and nobody found anything else related to the Sarah Joe. But then, all of a sudden, the boat was found, washed up on one of the Marshall Islands between Hawaii and the Philippines. A decade had gone by with no sign of the boat, but here it was. However, the boat wasn't a coffin full of unfortunate sailors as one might morbidly expect. In fact, 4 of the 5 still friends are still accounted for, but there was one man who was found, but just not in a way anybody expected. Next to the shipwreck was a grave, and buried in that grave was one of the men. But then who buried him? And where did they go? And why didn't they report what happened? At this point, I don't think we're getting any satisfying answers.
In at 3, Springfield 3. This name refers to an unsolved missing persons case that began on June 7, 1992, following the disappearance of 3 people, Susanna Streeter, Stacy McCall, and Streeter's mother, Cheryl Levitt, after they went missing from the Levitt's home in Springfield, Missouri. All personal belongings were left behind, including wallets, purses, and cars. There was no sign of a struggle aside from a broken porch light. However, in 1997, Robert Craig Cox came forward claiming he knew the women had been murdered and that their bodies would never be recovered. Sadly, no remains were ever found. Coming in at 2, Flight MH370. Arguably one of the most famous unexplained disappearances of all time, MH370 was a scheduled international flight operated by Malaysia Airlines that disappeared on March 8, 2014, flying from Kuala Lumpur Airport to Beijing. The aircraft last made contact with air traffic control when it was over the South China Sea, less than an hour after takeoff, before completely disappearing from air traffic control radar screens. However, it was still tracked on military radar, which showed the plane deviating westward from its planned route and across the Malay Peninsula until leaving range of the military radar while over the Andaman Sea. The transponder was turned off manually and no phone calls or distress signals were ever sent out. To this day, no one knows what happened to the plane, not a single piece of wreckage was ever found. And lastly, in at number 1, Roanoke. The history of Roanoke is just plain baffling and one of the oldest unsolved mystery cases dating back to August 1587. The story goes that a group of English settlers arrived on Roanoke Island off the coast of North Carolina. During that same year, the governor of the colony, John White, sailed back to England to gather supplies. As he arrived there, a naval war had broken out between England and Spain, and Queen Elizabeth I called upon every available ship to fight the Spanish Armada. It wasn't until August 1590 that White was finally able to return to Roanoke. However, when he arrived, he found no trace of the colony or its inhabitants. There was only a single clue remaining to confirm there were people once there, at some point at least. In a wooden post, a single word was carved. It said Croatoan, the name of an island just south of Roanoke. That was the home to a Native American tribe by the same name. Theories go that the colony were perhaps abducted or even killed by the tribe. Other hypotheses are that they tried to sail back to England on their own accord but got lost, getting intercepted by the Spaniards and ultimately killed. Another is that they moved further inland, joining a friendly tribe. To this day, there are no definitive answers as to where the colony went. What do you guys think though?
Starting off this countdown, we have Connor and Sheila Dwyer. On April 30th, 1991, married couple Connor and Sheila Dwyer attended a funeral in their town of Fermoy in Ireland. After the service, the couple were seen on the steps of the church. That was the last time they were ever seen. It wasn't until 23 days later that they were reported missing, after Sheila's sister hadn't heard from them for quite some time. Here's where it gets strange. Inside their house was all of their personal belongings. Nothing was touched. Their passports were there, large sums of money, and jewelry, which rules out a robbery. The only thing missing were Connor, Sheila, the clothes that they were wearing that day, and their car. It's thought that maybe they drove off together. But no money was taken out of the bank. Bags weren't packed, and the house looked like it was awaiting their arrival. So what happened to them? Well, all we have are theories. One of the theories is that Connor was experiencing financial troubles, so he got involved in the drug trade. But a lot of people disagree with this theory. Theory 2 is that they crashed their car into the river Blackwater. I mean, a year before the Dwyers disappeared, a man named William Fennessy also disappeared from Fermoy. In 2012, his body and car were found in the river. So it could be that the couple suffered the same terrible fate. To this day, this case remains one of Ireland's most baffling missing persons cases. Moving on to number 4, we have Michael Negrete. On December 10th, 1999, 18-year-old UCLA student Michael Negrete went missing. Apparently, he stayed up that morning playing video games in his friend's dorm until 4 o'clock in the morning. Michael then left to go to his own dorm. That was the last time he was ever seen. By 9 o'clock a.m., he was missing. Michael's roommate woke up at that time and saw that he was not in bed. All of his possessions had been left behind, like his keys and wallet. Even his shoes. Police dogs tracked Michael's scent to a bus stop a couple miles from campus. But it makes us wonder, why was he walking there with no shoes? And where was he going at that time and without his keys and wallet? Something is really fishy about this. The only lead the case got was a potential sighting of a man seen in Dykstra Hall at around 4:35 a.m. But no one knows if that was actually Michael or if it's even relevant to the case. Now, there are a couple of theories for this case as well. One of them is that Michael was experimenting with drugs and wandered off while on a trip. Another theory is that Michael was murdered and all of his friends helped to dispose of the body. And the last theory is that since a lot of construction was happening around the school, Michael fell into a construction pit and died.
Number 3 on this list is Alcatraz escapees. Alcatraz is potentially the most famous prison in all of history. It opened in 1934 and then shut down only 29 years later in 1963. 29 years is not a super long time considering the notoriety that this place got, but it all makes sense when you factor in the people who used to call this place home. Al Capone and Robert Strode are just some of the most notable high-profile inmates who used to stay here. Based on who was sent here and the overall geography of the prison in general, it quickly got the reputation for housing the world's most dangerous criminals. That's why it was so shocking when 3 people broke out in 1962. On June 12th of that year, the guards conducted a head count and realized that 3 people were missing. Frank Morris, John Anglin, and Clarence Anglin were all nowhere to be seen. All three men have been involved with some very dangerous armed robberies over the years, among other very illegal activities. The way that they escaped was truly ingenious. I don't have enough time to explain exactly how they did it in this video, but it was a mixture of disguises and tunnels and just a bunch of incredible prison break stuff. Either way, this sparked one of the largest FBI manhunts in history. The thing is, they literally had no leads at all. It's tough for there to be witnesses when the prison that they're breaking out from is in the middle of the water. The FBI eventually closed the case, basically telling the public that they believe that the men died during their escape, drowning on their way to land. This is certainly possible, but over the years, people have said that they've seen these criminals out in public. These sightings never resulted in any capture though, and the fate of the men still remain a complete mystery. Number 2 on this list is the Sims family killer. Stacker writes, in 1966, the grisly murder of a prominent family rocked Tallahassee, Florida, when 17-year-old Norma Jeanette Sims returned home from a babysitting gig to find her mother, father, and 12-year-old sister bound, gagged, shot, and stabbed to death. The case, which changed the previously quiet community, forever remains unsolved. Although a local pastor was long suspected, Leon County Sheriff Larry Campbell, who was a 24-year-old deputy and early responder that night, has said he knows of 2 suspects who he believes did it, although he refuses to name them to this day. 3 people brutally murdered for no apparent reason. The Sims family was apparently admired by people in their community and had no real enemies. When investigators got to the scene, robbery was also ruled out immediately because nothing of value was taken. The biggest person of interest was a pastor that Helen Sims had recently stopped working for. The fact of the matter was, though, that nothing of any value was discovered in this case, and even though it has been opened numerous times by various forms of law enforcement, the killer or killers could never be identified. Something like this just really reminds you how valuable life can be. A loving family taken far too soon for no known reason, and the individual responsible was never even caught. And finally, number 1 on this list is the Zodiac Killer. This is the type of thing that should keep us all up at night. The Zodiac Killer was a serial killer who was active in Northern California from 1968 to 1969. During their reign of terror, this unidentified serial killer is believed to have murdered at least 5 separate victims. The Zodiac Killer claimed that they had 37 different victims, but that's not ever been confirmed. Wikipedia writes, the Zodiac originated the name himself in a series of taunting letters and cards that he mailed to regional newspapers, threatening killing sprees and bombings if they were not printed. Some of the letters included cryptograms or ciphers in which the killer claimed that he was collecting his victims as slaves for the afterlife. Of the 4 ciphers he produced, 2 remain unsolved, and 1 took 51 years to crack. While many theories regarding the identity of the killer have been suggested, the only suspect authorities ever publicly named was Arthur Leah Allen, a former elementary school teacher and convicted sex offender who died in 1992. All of the evidence that is pointed to Allen being the killer is circumstantial though. There was never anything that beyond a reasonable doubt could place him at the locations of the murders or make him the guy who did this. Many people think that it was him, but they could be wildly wrong. If they are wrong, which is still very likely, then this killer may still be out there on the loose.
Coming in at 5, D.B. Cooper. Less scary and more baffling is the disappearance of D.B. Cooper. D.B. Cooper is the epithet used to refer to the unidentified man who hijacked a Boeing 727 in the northwest United States between Portland and Seattle on November 24, 1971. He extorted $200,000 in ransom and jumped from the aircraft, parachuting down to the ground. An extensive search was undergone, but the perp was never located or identified. Many theories have been brought about since the disappearance, including that he died in the fall, and another being that he is actually Tommy Wiseau, a personal fave of mine, but definitely the least believable. Decades later, and there is still speculation. What do you think happened to this hijacker? Do you think he's alive, or do you think he died when he parachuted out of the plane? Leave us all your thoughts and feelings below. In at 4, Martha Wright. In 1975, married couple Jackson Wright and wife Martha traveled through the Lincoln Tunnel en route to New York City. However, only one of them made it out the other side. Jackson Wright stated that while inside the tunnel, they pulled over to clean the car's windshield that had become blurred from condensation. Jackson cleaned the front while Martha did the back. However, when Jackson turned around, Martha was gone, having mysteriously disappeared. Jackson claimed he never saw or heard anything unusual. She was just gone. No evidence has ever been found. And to this day, no one knows what happened to Martha. The Lincoln Tunnel is now considered to be one of the highest risk terror attacks in the United States due to frequent robberies.
Coming in at number 3, we have Brandon Lawson. This case is particularly well documented online, with all sorts of people trying their hand at deciphering the last known phone call Brandon made. Brandon Lawson was a young man with substance abuse problems. He worked long hours at a hard job and had a felony warrant out on him. However, he also had a loving fiance and 3 children, with a 4th from a previous partner. Lots of conflicting emotions here for sure. One night after a long shift, Brandon came home and got into an argument with his fiance. After not coming home the night before, she was worried that he had relapsed and started doing meth again. This sent Brandon into a panic and he ran off into the night. He hopped into his car, claiming that he was going to stay at his dad's, a 3-mile drive from home. During his ride, he ran out of gas and parked his truck on the side of the road and called his brother asking for help. By the time his brother made it to the location, Brandon was gone, the truck was abandoned, and the police were on site. Somebody had seen the haphazardly parked vehicle and called it in. Nobody could find any signs of struggle near the vehicle, so they were confused as to where he went. Later on, it was discovered that Brandon had called 911 and claimed that he was being chased and feared for his life. Some say it was meth-induced paranoia, others think he was actually being pursued. That was the last contact Brandon had with anyone, and he hasn't been seen since. Many major investigations and searches were done, but none of them turned up anything. There are a few different theories as to what happened to Brandon. Some say he was murdered. He might have hit someone while driving and had them chase him down. If you listen to his final 911 call, there is what sounds like a second voice that comes through. Another theory is that he ran away and faked his death. He did have a felony warrant after all, and was supposedly doing drugs at the time. Speaking of drugs, the third theory was that he was paranoid and having a psychotic break, symptoms regularly associated with meth use. None of these theories have enough proof to come to a guaranteed conclusion though, and neither Brandon nor his remains have ever been found. Coming in at number 2, we've got the Sodder children. 5 children mysteriously disappeared on the same night, all following some very strange happenings. On Christmas Eve, the 10 Sodder children were basking in the glow of their new toys. 5 of them decided they wanted to stay up and play with them, and their parents gave this request the nod. Mom and Dad went to bed, and soon after, some weirdness began. The phone rang, and the voice on the other end asked the mother for a person she had never heard of. When she said she didn't know what they were talking about, they laughed and hung up. She was awakened again later by a sound on the roof. Her husband gathered the 5 children who hadn't stayed up, and it was then they realized that all the lights were on, all the shades were drawn, and all the doors were unlocked. When everyone got outside, they saw that the house was on fire. The dad rushed to get the other children from their rooms on the 2nd floor, but his ladder had mysteriously disappeared. Officials say that the 5 kids died in the fire, but the parents never stopped believing that they made it out somehow. At some point, a picture was mailed to them that purportedly portrayed one of their sons, now as a full-grown adult. No other evidence has surfaced. And finally, at number 1, we've got Evelyn Hartley. This one seems like something out of a horror movie. A teenage babysitter is kidnapped and pools of her blood are found nearby. Yikes. Sometimes reality is indeed scarier than fiction. Evelyn Hartley was hired to babysit a 20-month-old baby while the parents were out at the town's famous homecoming game. Most of the town was going, but Evelyn had to study, so she decided she would read while the baby slept. Her parents told her to call at 8:30 to check in, but she never did. Evelyn's father got worried and went over to the house to check up on her. He found the house completely locked up, save for a basement window and no Evelyn. There were pry marks on some of the windows, and a stepladder was moved, pointing to repeated attempts to enter the home. Inside, there were signs of a struggle and sneaker marks on the floor. After a desperate search, plenty of evidence was found, but Evelyn never was. 2 days later, a local man came forward and said he might have seen something. On his way to the homecoming game, he sighted a car speeding westward with 2 men and a girl inside. At the time, he just assumed they were heading to the game as well, and didn't think much of it as Evelyn's disappearance was undiscovered at the time. Lots more evidence was found in the coming days, like bloody garments and sneaker prints outside of town, but nothing conclusive. Truly a horror movie come to life.